We only have about 10 minutes or so before y'all have to get back to your day. I appreciate your time. Okay, so the interview that I'm gonna speak about when it comes to Tiger Woods is the one that he did with Trans World Sport in 1990. That'll make Tiger, 14 years old during that time, right? And you can check them out on YouTube. You know, I watched this video on YouTube. Once I thought about it, I was looked up some old Tiger videos when I was thinking about this stuff. You know, so this is an interview that I do remember also too, because it was a big deal when it came out. And the interviewer, he asked Tiger, basically, you know, like, do you ever feel under any kind of pressure, you know, or prejudice, because golf is quite often seen as an upper class white game, you know? And Tiger responded by saying, every time I go to a major country club, I always felt it. I can always sense it. When I go to Texas or Florida, you always feel it. They then say, why are you here? You ain't supposed to be here. Tiger then said, that's probably because that's where all the slavery was. And he sucks his teeth and shrugs his shoulders, you know, while saying, oh well, like, oh well. And you know, that's interesting in itself and mind-blowing. This is in 1990, and this is when the world is really getting on the map by Tiger. The interviewer, I think they were from the UK, I believe. I'm not totally sure, don't quote me on that, but I heard English type of Queen's English type of accent. And then I was thinking about you know, Augusta with the Masters and the history of the Masters. So it gets even more interesting. Now, you know, with the Masters, which is Augusta, Georgia, they didn't have, or actually the first time they even allowed a known African American to even touch the grass, basically, if they wasn't cutting it, was in 1975. Now keep in mind that interracial marriage was just passed by the U.S. federal government in 1967. So y'all got to put these time frames, you know, together, you know, and that way you can get to now and you'll see how all this correlates together and it meshes together. And while a lot of these things that are happening and the mind frame should not even be remotely surprising. They got their first African American member in 1990. We didn't even get into allowing women and things of that nature. That's a whole nother thing in itself. So back to this interview, he then asked Tiger, if you only had one tournament to win, what would it be? And he was like, you know, what tournament captures your imagination? And Tiger says the Masters, because the way blacks have been treated there. Since I'm black, I may be even bigger than Jack Nicklaus or Tom Watson. Since I'm black, I may be even bigger than Jack Nicklaus, at least to blacks, or at least to the blacks, I believe he says. Something like a MJ in basketball. Something like that. Now, this is very interesting, and we're gonna unpack that bottom section. I'm tell you why. He says something like a Michael Jordan. That's actually what it says. I say MJ, but he says something like a Michael Jordan in basketball, something like that. And I know that sounds crazy because we all know Michael Jordan's like the greatest ever. Like a lot of people think by far, you know, the greatest ever, without a doubt, no question, so on and so forth. You remember, we got to take this back. This is an interview in 1990. So at that time, you figure Tigers remembering like the 87, 88 season, the 88, 89 season, 89, 90 season, right? And he, is a really competitive and athlete, like a top tier talent of an athlete, as like a Michael Jordan, right? So their mind frame is a little different than the average athlete, even the average athlete that we think is really good. That's what makes them great versus somebody that's really good. So when you take that into account, you got to see where Tiger's coming from with that statement. Something like a Michael Jordan in basketball, something like that. Because see, at that time, to a lot of people and a lot of the pundits of the sports world and globally, Michael Jordan wasn't known as the greatest basketball player that we had ever seen at that time. When Tiger's going through this in his head and talking on his interview. You see, because believe it or not, I'm going to say some names to you that you might have never heard of. But these players were ill. Great basketball players. And of course, you had Larry Bird, which in 87 season, 88 season, he averaged 29.9 points a game. The 88, 89 season, that's when because Larry was on his downturn at this time, y'all. Remember, Larry came in the 70s with Magic. His back, knees, so on and so forth. So the 88, 89 season, he played 6 games. He averaged 19.3 points a game, that year with 6 games. And even a lot of people think that a lot of players slacked off of him because of the respect they had for him. And they know he's on his way out pretty soon, and it's Larry Bird, man. I mean, it's Larry Bird, you know what I'm saying? Respect. And then 89, 90 year, Larry played like, 75 games or something like that. And he ended up averaging 24.3 points a year. So you got to realize that people think, oh, we got the old Bird back mentality. Okay, so keep that in mind as I go down this list. It's a short list, though. And then you have like Tom Chambers, which Tom Chambers in 87, 88, he averaged 20.4 points a game. He was 6'10", balling, and he had spectacular dunks. He like posterized Mark Jackson, and I rock with Mark Jackson. Respect Mark Jackson. I rock with you. Legend. You know what I'm saying? And the street ball game was dumb on the streets up north. You know what I mean? So I rock with you, Mark, but posterized. And that's Tom Chambers. And Tom Chambers in 88, 89, he averaged 25.7 points a game. Then in 89, 90, Tom Chambers averaged 27 points a game. Okay. Then you have Mark Price. You got Mark Price, which he was known as this gritty, hard-nosed point guard. During that time, he was arguably, people used to debate if he was the best point guard or in the top 3 point guards in the NBA. I remember these talks, these debates, and I remember even us as kids talking about these players, trading cards, so on and so forth. So I know the energy and the mind state during this time with, and sports has always been like this. Sports is a reflection of the people of the culture also. So then you have Mark Price. He had 16 points in 87, 88. And he had 88. In 88, 89, he had 19 points. And in 89, 90, he had 19.6 points. Okay. Now, when you go to MJ numbers, in 87, 88, MJ had 35 points a game. In 88, 89, MJ had 32.5 points a game. In 89, 90 season, MJ had 33.6 points a game. So then you say, well, why you telling me about all these other guys and their points and stuff? I mean, I kind of see Bird, he was a legend, but why these other guys? That's the point. And that's the point why Tigers said what he said the way he said it. Because until the 90-91 Bulls, the 92-93 Bulls, 93-94 Bulls, you see, that's the Mike, when he just was in a whole nother level, like a mesosphere. You feel me? That's what Tiger's basically saying when he say, since I'm black, I may be bigger than Jack Nicklaus, at least to the blacks. something like a Michael Jordan in basketball, something like that. Because black people, or as Tiger would say, I would say African American, were like, yo, MJ the truth. That Michael Jordan guy, he the truth. He gonna be like the greatest ever, fam. You know, so on and so forth. And then you had people that were non-African American that were still hanging on to the Larry Bird idea, because you got to realize that basketball used to be an all-Caucasian sport only. So during this time, even though the league was predominantly African American for the most part, around this time period we talking about, it was nowhere near as African American as it is now. It's kind of like that change was coming, and people aren't comfortable with change. And sometimes it was, maliciously talked about with the hanging ons of certain players versus other players, and so on, the ushering in of this new era and these new type of athletes. But for the most part, it was pretty cordial. The negativity was mostly behind the scenes with contracts and endorsements and so on and so forth that had to be overcome. Once they went ahead and accepted that, it's just gonna be mostly African Americans. And then we just train up, and other coaches could train up, and we'll welcome them too when they come. And and that's how it should have been looked at from the beginning. But anyway, so that's what you got to put your mind at with these things like this with Tiger. And that's the early Tiger. Remember, this is Tiger at 14 years old.